So this is part C. So we've got part C and D to go through. And this one is about settlement patterns. So they're going to go through the 3 different types of settlement patterns, and then especially von Thunen. Gotta know von Thunen? Some of you saw that on the FRQ, my first hour class. I had to compare von Thunen to Burgess. They didn't do so well, sorry. So anyways, let's start with number 1 under letter C. Identify rural settlement patterns. Here they are: clustered, dispersed, and linear. So, my lovely picture here, most farmers, remember those are farmers in lesser developed countries, since more developed countries, most people are no longer farmers. They live in clustered, nucleated villages, not dispersed like you think of farming in the United States. So I'm going to give you a couple pictures, and I want you to say clustered, dispersed, or linear.
Clustered.
Clustered, okay? So that's what we mean by nucleated village. The people all live together. Now in some places in the world, there would be like a pen in the middle where the animals would be kept, right? Because the cattle, for instance, or the sheep, or whatever animal they're herding, is their most valuable thing. And the houses would be placed around it to protect that valuable commodity. When you have a clustered, nucleated village, it provides more community. And so actually in New England, when the first settlers came to America, they did settle in these nucleated villages. They did so for especially religious reasons as well, but they wanted that sense of community. This is not typical in America anymore, but it is in lesser developed countries, especially. What do you think? Can you see it?
Linear.
It's linear. All right, so this is the river, and these are what? Long lots. The picture's not the best, so it may kind of be hard to see the actual divisions between the farms, but this is linear. Here's the one that was in the Cahoot. Here's the river. The houses are all along the riverfront, right? And then the land stretches back from it. So you're going to plant your crops closer. The pasture would be further away, and then this is no longer close enough. The forest would be out in the furthest spot. But yes, that's the French. And I have a couple more pictures of that in a moment. Let's do another: clustered, dispersed, or linear. It's dispersed, okay? Now you might be like, I can't tell from that picture. This is just one farmer. It's just one farmer. This is his farm, right? Yeah, and you can his yard area or her yard area is, kind of sectioned off by trees and grass. And then this is the farm. All of that's one farm. And that's typically what you find in America. If you drive south, you're on 57 or 55, you pass these giant farms and the one farmhouse. We are dispersed. Question? What? Yes. And that's why in America, they rely so much on machinery. They farm all of that, one family. Now they may hire workers, but it's their farm. It's hard to imagine because we're suburbanites, but yeah, the farms are giant. Now remember, you don't have to do it all in a day. You have a good, my friend who's the soybean farmer, he's really, really busy in October, November during harvest, and then in the early spring during planting. And he cares, of course, for the crops over the summer, but he's pretty free to travel in the winter. So you have really busy times, and it'll take you a month to harvest all, because your land is so vast. It's not like it happens in one day. But yeah. And the machinery that requires, it's really expensive, but really awesome. I don't know. We You'd have to look it up. All right, so the last thing, one of the last things before number 2, it says, with improved transportation and manufacturing, vernacular styles and building materials are available. So farmers in America today, they can have these fancy farmhouses, right? They're still a part of popular culture, right? We're all connected. So if they want to build whatever type of modern house they want to in the middle of their farm, sure, right? I thought that was kind of a neat picture. All right, but they're still living in dispersed settlements, which means not really a settlement, a nucleated village at all, right? They're out there, and it is kind of scary. When I went to visit my friend, they live next to their grandparents, but they're the only houses on this unpaved street. And why isn't it paved? Because why would the city pay to pave their road when it's only 2 families living on it? It's very isolating. And when it snows, they get snowed in. It's just surrounded by corn and soybeans. Crazy. They have a pool? All right. So number 2. This is probably the most important model for agriculture, Van Thunen. All right, so you need to know the rings and why they're arranged that way. So you have the city or the market right in the middle, the milk shed closest to the center because it's perishable. Now this is one way to criticize Van Thunen. Back then, the forest was right after the milk shed and the perishables because lumber is so heavy to transport. And back then, everybody needed wood for fuel, right? And for warmth, and for building materials. So they did have a ring of forest. Then the grain, and finally the ranches, the animals themselves, which is the most extensive, right? You need a lot of land, but you don't have to work it very hard. All right, so the point of the model is that the farmer is a commercial farmer wanting to make money. So this doesn't apply to subsistence farmers. This is about commercial farming. It's based on rent. So my 8th period class had to do the bid rent FRQ last week. And land that is close to the city is the most expensive. Because it's so expensive, it excludes certain types of activities. Right? In this case, animal ranching, because they need a lot of land to graze on. That's not going to happen close to the city center. Right? So that happens on the outskirts. Other than land value, Van Thunen is also about recognizing transport cost. Right? Animals can walk themselves to the market. So they can be furthest away because there's essentially no transport cost. Grain, very easy to transport. You just stack it up. But what about something like fruit or vegetables? That has to be close. Right? Because it needs to be carefully transported or you're going to crush it. All right, so, yes, the urban center, dairy and market gardening, then the forests, then the grain crops, and the ranching. So, this was sections, part C, numbers 2 and 3. Section 3 asks you to analyze the application of the model to production in the real world. So although you may not see the rings anymore, and you could criticize the model by saying you can have dairy products anywhere because now we have refrigeration, right? The forest is no longer in that ring. The principles of the model still matter. So take a minute or two and look at this practice question and see if you can figure out how what we just talked about would relate to one of these real-world situations. It's on the bottom of that page.
Oh, yeah. Very large scale. We can get like the large spreads. What's happening about around the city? Yes. For instance, usually.
One more minute, I hear you still debating. Think about what you know about population density.
Southern Idaho is however, it's not very Ryan Brown. So probably gonna go there. Huh? What up with it? I don't know. I think AC.
All right, what's your answer here?
Hey.
Not D.
Hey.
It's A. All right, so you're looking to apply the model. So what you should do first is rule out things like rubber plantations and fishing, because are those a part of the model? No, it's not really talking about cash crops or fishing. So get rid of B and C. I think you guys did a pretty good job with that because you told me either A or D. All right, so try to get rid of things that the model doesn't focus on. Next, you're trying to apply it based on the principles that von Thunen set forward, which means A, crops that are perishable and hard to transport. Vegetables are hard to transport, right? Flowers were listed there as well. Definitely think about how quickly flowers wilt, right? How they have to be, in this case, modern times, kept cold, right? And gotten to the market very quickly. The market, the Netherlands, is a hugely, densely populated place. So it's perfect for von Thunen because it's essentially saying things that are perishable and need quick transport are by a high market, lots of people place. Whereas E, I'm glad nobody picked that one, dairy farms, yes, would be the same thing, right? Perishable. Is there anybody living in Utah and Idaho? No, think about population density of those places is very, very low. So that's the opposite of von Thunen, right? There's a lot of Mormon people there, but the state as a whole is pretty empty compared to the Netherlands. Does that make sense? All right. No? Think about population density. You could put dairy here, and that would still be the right answer. The point is that these places are empty, and so they wouldn't be. The model, von Thunen's model, wouldn't apply. Now, D is also not correct because raising cattle would happen far away from people, right? Right? The outer ring. So that would be a spot like Utah and Idaho. Not near Paris. Near Paris would be densely populated. Would von Thunen say you have cattle ranching in a densely populated place? Paris? No. So this is tough. It's really getting at, do you understand the concepts of the model, and do you know population density in different places in the world? So it's a good question, but I think it's a really hard one. Okay, so we're going to move on from von Thunen to our next section. And this stuff keeps coming up, and they've put it in different sections, in section C as well as in section D, all of the environmental consequences. So evaluate the environmental consequences of agricultural practices. And then they list all of these different things. So what I've tried to do is go through and make sure that you understand what is land use and land cover change. You may not know what that means. We've talked enough about irrigation, so I'll quickly go through that one. Do you know desertification, deforestation, wetland destruction, and then conservation efforts? So most of the time, you're going to say that modern agriculture is bad for the environment. But we know this, and so there are some conservation attempts and efforts to come back to organic farming, sustainable models, and we'll get to that in section D. All right, so the first one, well, in general, the argument is that when farming operations are sustainably managed, it's okay for the environment. But in a lot of places, the concern is profit, or the concern is just making enough food to get by, that it's a real threat to Earth, right? That a lot of these places are experiencing a lot of pollution, and that we're actually losing a lot of farmland. So it's possible, but it's not really happening, and we really need to be concerned about it. So the first one here, the first land use and land cover change, we are changing, right, with more and more people on Earth, we are changing what the natural landscape looks like. And the best example, I think, is deforestation. Right? In the past, people didn't live in tropical areas in huge numbers because agriculture is difficult to sustain there. Right? It was small groups of people doing shifting cultivation. They'd have to move on because the soil would wear out. Right? But now, especially countries like Brazil, one of the most populated countries in the world, are changing the rainforest into cattle ranches. So that would be an example of land conversion, right, and land cover change. You can't really blame them. I mean, we're all sad that we're losing the rainforest, but there's a couple reasons why. They want to develop, right, and it's profitable. So if they can cut down the trees and use it for something that's going to bring in money and help their country develop, it's hard to be judgmental. So, shifting cultivation to ranching. People want more meat, right? So, as you have more money, you can afford more expensive things like eating meat. The rainforest, therefore, is being cut down by ranchers, and that is the largest cause of deforestation in the Amazon. 80% of the land that they clear is used for ranching. And so the cattle industry has grown enormously in Brazil. Brazil is now the largest commercial cattle herder, ranching in the world, and they export the most beef in the world, more than the United States. So I'm going to show you this little video. It's only 1 minute, and I'll kind of show you what I mean. Fourth largest climate polluter in the world. 75% of that caused by burning the forest to clear it. Right? And here's the rancher. And those cows look different than the ones that you're used to seeing. Same purpose, though. Huge numbers of them. They've cleared a size of Portugal there in hopes of doubling beef production by this year. So maybe it makes a little bit more sense how it happens, just to visually see it. Now remember, they're used to controlled burning parts of the rainforest, slash and burn, right? But instead of letting that vegetation come back, they've completely changed it to ranching. Okay, last one on that example is how you see that in popular culture. Have you guys eaten at these places? Cactus de Brazil? It's all about the meat. They bring platters of meat, out. All different types of meat. And you can eat as much meat as you want. It's really crazy. They give you these cards, red and green. You put up your green card, they bring you platters of meat. It's expensive to eat there, but Texas de Brazil. I thought it was like maybe that'll remind you. All right, so the next thing is about water. And you may not know this. Do you know that the agriculture sector consumes 70% of all fresh water in the world? So what uses the most water? Agriculture. Because it makes sense. And we did that activity where, in your book, where you had to figure out how much of California's water you use. Remember that? By eating the fruits and vegetables that are grown there. You may not even realize that. All right, so this is a really big deal. And irrigation is really important, of course. Like, you can't grow crops without water. But there's problems with it. A lot of times the irrigation systems are leaky and they're applied wastefully. And then we grow crops that probably shouldn't be grown in that area just because we can. And we haven't been as concerned with water. We really should be, because that's one of our number one concerns this century, is going to be having enough of that water. I have an example here. This is in Jordan. Jordan is an arid place. They probably shouldn't be farming there, but they can because of irrigation. All right? So they're taking water out of an aquifer that's underneath the land, and these are their fields. Now it works, but think about how much water you need to use when so much of it evaporates in such an arid place. And remember, this is the center pivot irrigation system. So when you fly over and you see a circle, that means the water, comes up here and they spray it in a pivot system. Sometimes the irrigation systems are on wheels and it's a rectangular system and they go just across the crops. But this one kind of sticks with me because when I think about this, or when I think about golf courses in Vegas, you start asking yourself, is that really a good use of water? Now, if you're a golfer, you might say yes, but it's not good for an arid place that we're worried about using so much water, running out of it. All right, the next one is on desertification, which is when semi-arid land turns into arid land. Think about, it's really easy, the growth of the desert, desertification. All right? Oftentimes on the AP test, they ask where it's the biggest threat. So it's going to be the biggest threat in places that are next to a desert. And so you have the Sahara Desert spreading south, desertification. So this is the Sahel region of Africa. It's, essentially the strip below the Sahara Desert. So it's barely sub-Saharan Africa. Right? And as the Saharan Desert spreads, more and more of Africa becomes desert. So that's in that section there. And a lot of these countries that are in this region, including Sudan and Niger, are experiencing famine. So that's something that I just added in when you're talking about real people who are trying to get more out of the land because they need more food for their families. We're talking about a place with high fertility rates, right, and a low status of women. So we know that they're having a lot of kids. And so if they're working the land more than they should be, and desertification is a problem, it leads to famine. And it's really sad. And in some of these places, it's not only environmental causes. Sudan has also had a lot of instability due to civil war. But this is in Nigeria here. And the famine-affected regions of the Sahel in 2012 because of drought. And one more thing. The countries that experienced the most famine last year, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Nigeria. Yemen, of course, again, because of the civil war, but some of it is environmentally related. So that was a good link there for desertification. Again, the people probably need better education to know that their farming methods are causing this, but they're just desperate to feed their families. So it's difficult. All right, we already talked about deforestation. So I'm going to skip that one and go on to wetlands. I never talked about wetlands in my class. I'm not sure if Mr. Abel or Mrs. Bose did, but it's listed here as an environmental consequence of agricultural practices. So I want to make sure you know what's going on. So wetland areas are being drained for a couple of things. One, for housing. Think about the Everglades. Wasn't that one of our first pictures of the day? Oh, the Everglades area and how they have all those waterfront homes. Anyways, they're also being turned into aquaculture businesses where the bogs or whatever swamplands are used to raise fish or shrimp. Right? So wetlands provide so much natural benefit that this is a real concern. And yet, and these are some of the things that they do: water storage, storm protection. They help absorb flood waters. And so when they're gone or used for other purposes, we're really concerned when it rains too much and there's nowhere for the water to go. They purify the water, groundwater recharge, habitat, of course, for tons of animals and different species. They prevent erosion. So like wetlands do all this good stuff for Earth. But again, right, with especially agriculture, we want more food and we want more money for our businesses. And so we're destroying wetlands more rapidly than any other ecosystem because this land is available and it's traditionally not been used for agriculture or for settlement, right? Nobody usually lives in wetlands unless they're drained or turned into something now that we can use aquaculture with our new technology. So wetland destruction has increased flood and drought damage, nutrient runoff and water pollution, and shoreline erosion. And so it's concerning, and I'm going to do a thing on aquaculture. Aquaculture is really cool if it's done right. It's kind of creepy thinking about all those fish. But it's also really damaging to the environment if done improperly. And that's what they want you to know. All right, so aquaculture is raising fish for human consumption and in a controlled environment. It's not just out there on the open oceans fishing. It's raising fish in a confined environment. It could be in the ocean. It could be in a former wetland area that's been fenced in, essentially. It could be in an indoor facility. So more on aquaculture in a moment, but they included it there on wetlands destruction. So I wanted to as well. Okay, and then lastly in this section is conservation efforts. So this is the good stuff. We have all these different conservation efforts in the whole world. People really care about animals. There's a lot of people who that is their cause. The Save the Rainforest movement gets a lot of press. And there are efforts going on to conserve water. They have irrigation systems that apply a drip system, a very limited amount of water, right to the root of the crop. So you're not wasting it by spraying it on the whole field or spraying it in a place like Jordan or Vegas, right, where the water evaporates right away. Like the water literally is dripped onto the roots of the plant, just enough to give it exactly what it needs. Plants that grow without soil, like these. New technology in the Netherlands. I'm going to show you a little video. My thing. So ways here, right? Conservation efforts to protect or restore natural land cover and the global impacts of becoming better, more precise farmers and using less. So let's watch our Netherlands. Oh, I have a picture first and then the Netherlands video. The Netherlands does more with less, utilizing innovations on a grand scale, like hydroponic farming, growing plants without soil in nutrient-rich solutions, reduces runoff, saves water and money. So this is in growing tomatoes, how much water footprint, meaning how many gallons of water they use in different places. The global average is 25 gallons per pound of tomatoes. China's worse, right? So they're using way too much water. We're using a lot less, 15.1 gallons per pound of tomatoes in the Netherlands. So to me, this is so exciting because a small country like the Netherlands, using all these greenhouses and amazing technology, they're doing something that we could all do if we have enough training and the technology is available. Why wouldn't we want to? Right? It's good for the environment. It's good for your pocketbook as a farmer. Right? They're showing you how many greenhouses are in the Netherlands. 36 square miles of greenhouses there, which is bigger than Manhattan. So you can get a sense, and the video will show you too, how many greenhouses are there. That allows farmers to closely control growing conditions, to use less water, and to worry less about fertilizer and pesticides, because if you have a greenhouse, you don't have bugs getting in, right? Like you would in an outdoor field. So there's all these amazing things. So when this happened in the Netherlands, starting in 2003 to 2014, when they collected this data, they've made 28% more vegetables and use less energy, less pesticides, and less fertilizer. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about conservation efforts. It's not only good for the environment, it's good for farmers. Second biggest food exporter, while reducing water use by 90%. Less pesticides because of their technology. Drones to monitor potato fields. More yields, more than double the global average. And those are the greenhouses. Small, densely populated. Think of how much bigger we are. And they're exporting their knowledge, which is what that article is about in National Geographic. So if we have all these more people to feed, how are we going to do it? Going Dutch could feed the world. So to me, this is like, it could be what the Green Revolution was. It could be. Because we need it to be if we're going to have 10 billion people in the world. We're going to have to find ways to use less water, okay, and to make more. Problem is, of course, can you use this type of technology in lesser developed countries? You can, just not at the same scale. You're not going to have that type of infrastructure. But I think it's amazing. Okay, so this is our last section. Perfect. I have 15 minutes left. It's going to work out. So let's look at part D. Are you ready? Changes in food production and consumption present challenges and opportunities. So some of this new contemporary agricultural issues, right? So we're doing all these new things. What's good and what should we be concerned about? And so here are the debates that they want you to be aware of. Biotech and GMOs go hand in hand, right? Using science and biotechnology to create new crops. Some people call them frankenfoods. Other people say it's needed because it's more food for the growing population. Organic farming. A lot of your families are probably buying more organic food than ever before. Right? In general, it's good. It's definitely good for Earth, but it's more expensive too. So not everybody can afford it. And like I said, I talk a little bit more about aquaculture because fish are a great thing to eat, and done properly, aquaculture is awesome, but we're not doing it properly. And that's really what all of this farming stuff comes down to. All right, so GMOs are organisms where genetic material has been altered in a way that doesn't occur naturally. And that's why the Europeans don't want to import genetically modified food, because they feel like it's messing with nature and messing with the most important thing that we need, right? We need our food. So we do it, and the debate in America isn't about using it. It's too late for us. The debate is whether or not it should be labeled. Now, to me, I don't know why they wouldn't just label it. Right? What are they trying to hide? But that's what they're afraid of, that people will freak out. And we don't really have many options because so much of our food supply is already genetically modified. But we do it, Argentina, Canada, Brazil, China. Notice no European countries on that list. Here is what? Aquaculture. I have a lot of pictures of aquaculture. It's another one of those things that kind of freaks me out that I just think is so cool. There's good ways to do it. This was one of my pictures of the day. They do it off the coast of Canada here. And the idea is that it's integrated, more food and less pollution. The waste that is produced by the caged fish seeps into the surrounding water to nourish the scallops and mussels. Right? So if the fish and all of their waste goes here, and they are the filter feeders and eat it, and then their waste goes to the seaweed that absorbs the nitrogen and phosphorus, and yay, it can be done well. Right? So good for the people of Vancouver, because that's their water supply in the Pacific Ocean. Or you could do it inside. This is a tank full of tilapia. It's the largest indoor fish farm. Produces more than 4 million pounds of fish a year. Whoa. Also kind of freaks me out. Think about like swimming in this. Could you do it? But it's amazing. Think about how much food they can make. But here's why it's such a debate. You're like, well, why not then? Seems like a no-brainer. Well, you've got to do it right, because if you're doing it in the open water, and there's no natural filtration and all of that waste gets stuck, right? It creates these algae blooms. The overstocked lake produces large number of farmed fish, but excess nutrients trigger blooms that use up the oxygen in the water and then kill the fish. So you have to be just so careful with some of this new technology. And the idea is to make money by farming fish. That is considered agriculture, by the way, aquaculture. But it could end up looking like this, right? And so there's been movements to get the word out that this should stop. And yet you see it in every type of place, whether it's like we were talking about with the wetlands, or in the open oceans, or in indoor facilities. Right? You have to recognize that this is needed because we need to make more food and we need more protein. And fish are really good converters of the feed that you give them into meat that you can eat. So like cattle are the worst. It takes pounds of feed needed to produce 1 pound of body mass. So they need to eat so much in order for you to eat steak or hamburger. Pigs need less, chickens need less, fish need the least. So that's really efficient. So we'd like to eat more fish. And it's increasing everywhere, especially in Asia. Jake?
Is it easy to do aquaculture? Like, you're not easy, just is it cheap?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's why it's so alluring to people, because it's relatively cheap to set these, even indoor facilities up. But the tricky part is knowing how to do it sustainably, because you guys have goldfish or fish at home? I feel like we have to change our tank every couple weeks because it just gets dirty quickly. Think about doing that on a massive scale and what you're going to do with all of that dirty water. All right, so enough about aquaculture. Let's go on. I should have flipped the page a while ago. Okay, so now we're on the next bullet point, environmental issues. I know you like my little poop emoji. Related to sustainability, soil degradation, reduction in biodiversity, overgrazing, river and aquifer depletion, animal waste, and fertilizer and pesticide use. So I'm going to skip through a lot of this because on your note sheet it's really straightforward. You need to know what erosion is. You need to know that with a lot of the new seeds that we've created, that has threatened the world's biodiversity. And remember, we're concerned about this, like, these are challenges, right? So the new seeds are great because they're more productive, but somebody owns them. And by only using those, we're taking out a lot of the natural biodiversity that exists in the world. And that could be a threat in the future. Overgrazing, we've talked about, and how that can lead to desertification is something you should know. The overuse of water. So that leads us here to animal waste. This is one thing that you may not have thought about, but when you have an animal feed operation, so this is not grazing of animals. This is a feedlot. So when you have a concentrated number of animals in a feedlot, they produce a large amount of waste. A single dairy cow produces 120 pounds of poop. Yes, you can use it as fertilizer, but if you have so many cows, you don't need that much fertilizer. So what are you going to do with the mountains of poop? Right? The waste produced by one cow is equal to 20 to 40 people. So I'm just trying to make you think about, like, if you have this many animals in one space, you got to have a plan for that. Because, yeah, sure, the manure can be used and it can be a valuable resource, especially if you're doing mixed crop and livestock, right? So you have the cows there and you're using their waste to help grow your crops, supplying manure to the land. But if you have too much of it, it becomes a problem. If not managed correctly, it can pollute the environment and especially water. So it might not be something you've ever thought about before, what to do with all the poop, but I think it's kind of funny to talk about and to realize, wow, like, and when you have such a large scale operation, there's all these other side effects, especially that are bad for the environment. All right, in the next section, one last thing in that one underneath animal waste. Be aware of the fertilizer and pesticide use in modern agriculture. All right, so I have a lot of data there for you that you don't have to memorize. You just need to know that we use a lot more fertilizers and pesticides than ever before, and that can also get into the groundwater. So we need to be careful with that, which is why, again, the Netherlands is such a nice model. All right, the next section is about patterns of food production and consumption. And so there's a couple things I don't think you know what they are. We know organic farming, so I'm skipping that. But the next one there is value-added specialty crops. The economic value of a food through a particular production process, whether in this case it's organic, that increases consumer appeal and willingness to pay a premium. So value-added, like why are you going to grow organic food if you could grow a lot more non-organic food? Well, the idea is customers are willing to pay more for it. So there's a little niche in the market, right? And that's what this value-added specialty foods thing means. All right, so it's good for people who want to have a small farm because organic farming is difficult on a large scale. So if you want to have a small farm, that could be, organic farming could be for you. And a lot of women are getting into that, by the way. Small-scale organic food processing, non-traditional crop production, tourism. People who want to go to wineries, people who want to go to like dude ranches, people who want to feel like they're out there ecotourism in nature, right? These are all value-added projects. So here's some examples. If you're like, what the heck is value-added? Remember, it's something that people are going to pay a premium for. Do you guys ever go up to like, what's the farm that has the giant corn maze? Have you ever been up there? It's near the Wisconsin border. Anyways, that's an example of value added. So the farmer has their corn, but then at the end of the season, they make this giant maze out of it, and a bunch of suburbanites want to go there and go in the corn maze. It's really fun. I would recommend that for a date when you're like a junior or a senior, and then you can have a little like fire afterwards and like have s'mores, wine tours, organic farming. All of this is value added. Going on. Fair trade. Do you remember the coffee movie? Fair trade is a way of getting more money in the hands of small farmers. All right? 500,000 farmers in 20 countries are fair trade certified for coffee. And even Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, it's us. What we buy as consumers impacts what these major corporations do. And so they have started supporting the small growers or the organic growers, depending, right, what we demand. And so the idea of fair trade is that we don't want those middlemen to take advantage of the farmers. And we want more of the money to get into the people actually doing the hardest work. All right, there's only 2 sections left. Now, 2 little things. I'll try to be quick. With the fair trade stuff too, please read through the local food movements. There's a lot of us who have the money that like to go to local farmers markets and buy local. That's a new thing with agriculture too. This grow local and buy local movement. Even some like fancy restaurants advertise that, you know, their food came from such and such a farmer locally. All right, so 2 things left. Food production facilities. This is potatoes here. Food production facilities tend to be close to where the crop is grown because potatoes would be heavy to transport, right? So why not have the facility that processes them into French fries be in Idaho? Okay? We'll talk more about this in industry, how you decide where to put your factory, but oftentimes that is the case. Processing facilities are located as close as possible to the fields where the crops are grown. In other cases, where the animals are raised depends on things like where you can pay people very little, like that movie we watched, to raise these chickens, right? So you have a lot of growers, broiler houses in the southeast, because those people used to be tobacco farmers, and now that era is almost over in American history. So what they're desperate for some type of job, they're willing to take this one. Even though they don't control their own business, they're at the mercy of these multinational corporations. Right? And then the facilities to process them, right? People say, oh, this isn't farming. Well, this is mass production. This is how we get our cheap chicken. And lastly, people are saying, so don't cut yourself short here, that this, on my little Facebook page for other nerdy AP Human Geo teachers, this section is one of the things that they're saying might be the FRQ this year. I don't know how people know, or if there's just a total guess, or if somebody actually knows something. This is the last section here. Number 3, explain the changing role of women in food production and consumption. In lesser developed countries, women are the world's farmers. Women are subsistence farmers. In America, about 31% of farmers are women, which is an increase from the past. There's 1 million women farmers in America. And so what they're saying is, you know, traditionally before agriculture, women were the gatherers, right? Men were the hunters, women were the gatherers. And that they've always had a role in that way. But now, women themselves are actually farmers, and in more developed countries, women are managing agribusiness. In lesser developed countries, though, where women are the main subsistence farmers, it's still difficult. And this is where all that gender stuff that we've talked about throughout the year kind of comes into play. So although women do most of the farming, they do not have equality. It's not easy for them to own the land. It's not easy for them to get a loan. All right? And oftentimes in lesser developed countries, men go off to the cities to work and get a cash job, and women are at home doing all of the child rearing and food production for their family. Sometimes it takes them hours a day just to collect water. All right? And one way that we could change that, of course, would be to promote gender equality and get women access to the technology and the finance, right, and the land ownership that they really need. So if you look at some of these stats on this page, the percentage of women that work in agriculture, it might hit you a little bit harder. And talk about how if you gave women more rights, it would be a lot easier for them to support their families. So read that section over and If you would like to stay to do the sample questions, I'll give you the answers at the end. If you've got to go, feel free to take off. I included some definitions there for you just to look over. The sample questions are there, and the answers will be posted soon.
Shut up.
Have a good rest of your Sunday.
That's what I put.
I'm giving you a ride.
Wait, Amy, are you going or no?
You staying?
What? After, do you want to stay?
My dad can't come for like another 5 years.
No, if she has friends, I'm good with this.
My parents aren't gonna be here either.
You read the same question?
I don't wanna look into the questions.
Is it? Wait.
It's shaded just like a bunch of socks.
Yeah. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the best.
I don't think it's worse.
Isn't it corners? It's not cheap, it's not bad. Is it rice?
There is some of it in the
I think it meant
Chinese.
cab.
So,
It's cab.
yeah, that sounds right. You're 30. You're willing to steal.
Let me know when you guys are done, and I'll put the right answers up.
My parents are here enough. Yeah. Can you put it up?
Yep.
I only got 13. Simple can. Why is it corn?
Because it says a new world domesticate, which means which one of these came from the Americas? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Wheat is from like the Fertile Crescent area.
Alright, thank you.
All right. Did you get the rest of them?
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope that was worth it, right?
Yeah.
Hard to come in on a Sunday.
It's easy to understand with all the pictures and stuff.